This video is brought to you by the Angular Tutorial. The Angular Tutorial is a book written by me that I wish I had when I was just starting out in web development. I remember trying to get my first jobs, and it felt like I was just piecing together bits of information, a little bit from that tutorial, a little bit from that tutorial, a little bit from that one, and it didn't feel like I had just a single comprehensive resource that could get me ready to begin my career as a front-end developer on the job, just ready to go and start working. So that's why I wrote this book. This is a book I've written after 5 years of experience within the industry, working at a variety of companies, startups, Fortune 500 companies, digital agencies, and I've combined everything I know into this book to teach you everything you need to become employable in the industry. That's my goal with this book. It simulates working as a front-end developer, how I've worked at multiple jobs. You know, it doesn't cut corners like a lot of other tutorials do, leaving huge chunks of information as a afterthought. You know, oh, that's out of scope for this tutorial. I cover automated testing. I cover actual programming. I cover end-to-end testing. I teach you how to set up a database and an API locally on your computer and then deploy that and the Angular application you write in this book out into the web so that anybody can access it. So if you're looking for a resource that's going to prepare you for the job and get you employable, check out the Angular tutorial at angulartutorial.org, which provides a digital copy. It'll get you a PDF, an HTML copy, and then two EPUB and Mobi for e-readers like a Kindle. And then the book is also available at Amazon. Check the links below if you're interested in purchasing. This is how I support myself full time. So this is essentially my job. Other than that, I'm just creating free materials for you guys like this video. So I hope you enjoy it. In this video, we're going to be building off of what we learned in our last video. In our last video, we wrote a simple program in JavaScript in 3 different ways. We did it using an HTML page, we did it using the JavaScript REPL, and then finally we wrote the same program using a .js file. And this program was a very simple thing. It's often the first program you learn to write when you begin learning how to program, and that's the Hello World program. So if you'll remember from the previous video, we were just writing a simple string to the user that said Hello World. And that was the first data type that we were introduced to. In this video, we're going to expand on that a little bit more and look at some of the other data types that are available to us in JavaScript. And we're not going to be building, or we're not going to be doing more programming necessarily. We're still going to be writing things out to the user, but rather than just writing strings, it's important and worth taking a look at some of the other data types available to us in JavaScript. So let's take a look. So the first thing we're going to do is create a directory for the code that we're about to write. So similar to last time, we're going to just create a directory. We'll call this one web dev data types, and then we'll do cd to change directories into that directory we just made. And then once we're inside that, we're just going to create a new file called datatypes.js. And then we can open Visual Studio Code. And then once you're in Visual Studio Code, you can then just open the directory we made and then the file that we just created, datatypes.js. And the first thing we're going to look at, which we kind of covered in the last video, is comments. So if you'll remember, we can do something like this, console.log, and we'll just put a string my name. But just like in HTML, how we had comments like this that were ignored by HTML, in JavaScript we have comments that you start with 2 forward slashes. So we can just do comment here, save that, and then if we run this program, we'll see that it only logs out my name. The comment here is entirely ignored. This is what's known as a single line comment. If you wanted this comment to span multiple lines, you just use this syntax. So you do /*, and then you do */, and then anything within these 2 forward slashes and stars is classified as a comment. So we can add a comment here. And then once again, we go back, run the program, and you'll see that the comment isn't printed out to the screen. All right, so before moving on to the data types, I think it's worth spending some time to discuss how it is that we're going to work with these data types. And we'll do this by just going back to where we left off in our previous video. So we had a program like this, console.log hello world. And as we said, the text that is enclosed by these two single quotes is what's known as a string. Now, the data types that we use in JavaScript, we typically store somewhere. We put these in a container, and these containers in JavaScript are known as variables. So just above this, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new variable, and we're going to call it greeting. And we're going to assign it to a string, hello world, like this. And now, instead of console.logging this string right here, we can just use the variable that we created. Then when we save this, go back here and run that program, you'll see that hello world is actually logged to the screen. Similar to the function call in the previous video, we can actually break down this variable declaration into a few parts. So here you'll see we begin with what's known as a declaration, and that's noted by the text let. So that is how we declare a variable. After that, you provide the variable name or the identifier. And in this case, we created the identifier greeting. After that, we use the equal sign operator, which is highlighted in purple. And to the right of that equal sign is where we set the value that we want in the variable. So here we have the hello world string that we are assigning to the identifier greeting. And then later on in our program, as we saw just a minute ago, rather than having to pass a string as an argument to console.log, we can just reference this greeting variable instead, because greeting is the container for the value hello string, hello world. Now, it is possible in JavaScript to declare a variable without actually assigning a value to it. So if we go back to our program right here, we can go up here, and instead of initializing a value to it, we'll just get rid of all that. So now we've just declared a variable, and we've specified its identifier or its name as greeting. And then we're going to leave this just the way it is. We're going to do console.log greeting. And then just below that, we're going to actually set the value of this. Then once more, we'll console.log greeting. So we declare a variable, then we're printing, why is that light bulb there? Then we're printing the value of greeting, then we set the value of greeting, and then we print the value of greeting again. So let's see what happens here. So we'll run node datatypes.js, and you see that it prints out undefined, and then it prints out hello world. So undefined is a value in JavaScript that's assigned to a variable if no value's been assigned to it. So here we did let greeting, and because it hasn't been assigned a value, it just logs out undefined. Then we set the value hello world to greeting, log it out once more, and then we actually saw the hello world string. Now, we'll get to undefined in a little bit because it's one of those things in JavaScript. Like I said, it's just a part of the language. Undefined is just set to a variable if you don't assign a value to it. But we'll see how we can use this to control the flow of our programs a little bit later on. So why do we even need variables in the first place? Well, variables give us symbolic identifiers to work with inside of our code. Because as you can already see, something like hello world, like, yeah, we get it. It's a string that we can read. But there's almost like a higher level function of that string. In our case, as we found out with our variable name, it's a greeting. So let's say at some point in the future, our greeting changes, or let's say this greeting is used repeatedly throughout our program. Every time we wanted to use that greeting, we'd have to actually type out hello world. But with variables, we can just assign hello world to a variable like greeting a single time. And then anytime we need that value, we can just use the variable greeting. And more importantly, later on, let's say your greeting changed. Let's say you didn't want to say hello world anymore. You had some other greeting instead. Well, without variables, you'd actually have to go through and find and replace every single time you use the greeting hello world. And you couldn't really rely on find and replace either, because what if there was a typo? What if somebody fat fingered a key and it actually said hello WRLD? There was no O. With variables, it gives you just a single point of reference. You declare a variable once, you assign it a value, and then if that needs to change, you can just change it in one spot, and anywhere else in our program that uses the variable greeting is automatically updated. So now that we've covered variables and why we need variables, we can now look at our first data type, which we've already been covering to some degree, and that's strings. But there is a little bit more I want to cover before moving on to some of our other data types. The first thing is that when you're creating a string, you can use either single or double quotes. Now, up to this point, I've been using single quotes because that's my preferred preference. But you can also create strings using double quotes. So here we have a first name variable set to the string Adam. Then we'll create a last name variable set to, using double quotes, Morgan. And then just below this, we'll log out first name, and then we'll log out last name. So we'll do that, save this, and then if we run our program, we'll see that it logs out Adam and it logs out Morgan, and that both ways of creating strings are perfectly valid. So the one time this can get a little weird is whenever you have a single or a double quote inside of a string. So imagine you had something like let message equals you can't be serious. And as you can already see, we're starting to see some weird issues. Our text editor's going a little weird, but just to do the whole program, we'll just log message. So we'll save that. Obviously, something's not right here, but we'll go back to the terminal, try and run our program, and you'll see that there's a syntax error, unexpected identifier, and it's because within our single quotes, we have another single quote, this apostrophe. So the way we can fix this is to just put a backslash right in front of it. So if you do that, you save it. You can also kind of tell that things are a little bit better now. The whole string's yellow. There's no red squiggly lines. Go back, run that, and you'll see that now everything works. Now let's imagine that you prefer to use double quotes, and within a string that's enclosed in double quotes, you also have more double quotes, like dialogue. So we'll change this to something like, he asked, where are we? As you can see, we're getting some issues because we have a double quote here, a double quote here, and then more double quotes to wrap the dialogue. So we'll save that, go and run it, and we'll see that once again we see unexpected identifier because we have double quotes within double quotes. So again, we can fix this by either escaping these double quotes with the backslash as we did before. See that that runs correctly. Or if you'd prefer to just not use the backslash escape character, you can actually just change these outer ones to single quotes. Save that and run it and do it again. And there you see it works just fine. So if you have double quotes inside of a string, it might be a good idea to just change them to single quotes on the outside, or if you prefer, you can just escape it with the backslash character, whatever you prefer. Neither one's really right or wrong. As I said earlier, my preference is to use single quotes, but depending on the team, depending on the developers you're working with, I'd say just get used to both because you're probably going to have to use both at some point. Next up on the list are numbers, and numbers are a bit easier because unlike strings, numbers actually are very analogous to how we think about numbers in the real world, because characters, words, sentences, we don't refer to those as strings. So when you hear something like string, you have to understand what that is in programming. Numbers are numbers. So here we'll start off with a number like pi. We'll assign that to 3.14. We'll do another one for my age, 28. And then, as usual, we'll log both of these variables that we've created out to the screen. So we'll do that, save it, go back here. And if this is starting to get a little too cluttered for you, there's a command clear that you can run. That'll clear the whole screen for you. And if you need to, your history is still there. But it clears it, and we'll run this. And also, just little pro tips. If you saw me do that thing where it just kind of auto-completed, that's because if you type the tab character, this will autocomplete for you. Your terminal will do it for you. So if we just do ls, we'll see that we have one file here, data types. So if I do something like node D and then I do tab, it just auto-completes the rest of that file name because that's the only one here that starts with D. So pro tips. So node data types.js, run that, and as you can see, our number 3.14 and 28 is printed out to the screen. Now, along with numbers, we also have some mathematical operators at our disposal for us to use. So we'll just use a few of these examples. We have the plus operator, which adds two numbers together. We'll do the minus operator, which subtracts numbers. We can also do multiplication. And then finally, we'll do some division. So we'll save all those, go back here, run that, and you'll see that the arithmetic operators that are available to us in JavaScript do indeed perform math as expected on these numbers. The next data type that's available to us in JavaScript is known as a Boolean. And Booleans are a data type that has either one of two values, and that's either true or false. So in code, we'll go ahead and create our first variable. We'll do something like is drinking age. We'll assign that to true. Now notice when we're creating a Boolean, we don't wrap this in quotes. If we did that, it would have a string, which happens to read true. What we want is a Boolean, which is a different data type. So you just write true without the quotes, and then we can do another one like is senior citizen equals false, and then we'll also log these out just so you can see, and then is senior citizen. Earlier we were talking about how we can auto-complete file names whenever you're working in the terminal. That's also available in your text editor as well. So as you saw, I did like is senior sit, and then there's our variable. You can just tab and auto-complete that. Before we run this, another thing I want to address real quick is the way we're declaring these variable names. If you'll notice this thing where we have a capital D and then a capital A, this is what's known as camel casing in programming languages. So it's really just a readability thing, because compare something like this to that. As this starts to get longer and longer, it becomes a bit harder to read because there's no like visual identifier as to where each word starts. So for that reason, we do something like this where we have a capital letter for each word. So we start off with a lower one, is, and then capitalize the D in drinking, capitalize the A in age. Another thing you might see is something like this. Not as popular in JavaScript, but some developers might use it. So if you see it, just know that's just another way of creating variable names. So we'll delete that, save this, go back here, run our program, and as you can see, true and false are written to the screen. Now, as you could probably kind of infer from that example, Booleans are useful when a variable can either have one of two values. And there's actually a lot of kind of real-world examples you could draw from, too. So imagine you're a bouncer at a bar, and this bar has a rule where, you know, you show them your ID, and if you're 21 or over, you get in. If you're under 21, then you have to leave. When the bouncer grabs your ID, what he's doing is he's checking the birthday. And then if the birthday is on or before a certain date, that means you're 21 or older. And when they do that, they're assigning a Boolean value. Even if they might not be thinking about it in this way, they're assigning a Boolean value to a variable like is drinking age. And the variable is drinking age is true, and the company's policy is if they're of a drinking age, they can get in. So the bouncer knows, okay, they're 21 or older, you can get in. Next person comes up, they're under 21, they get out. So you kind of have this Boolean that's able to control the flow of your program. You know, the bouncer gets a Boolean, and if they're of a drinking age, he has one course of action. Otherwise, he has a secondary course of action. And we're kind of getting into conditionals, but we'll get to that in a minute. Up until now, every variable we've been creating has been assigned a single value. So we've either assigned a string to a variable, a number to a variable, or a Boolean. But sometimes we want a variable to have multiple values, and that's where arrays come in. Arrays in JavaScript are an ordered set of multiple values. So let's look at how we declare an array. So we'll start off with our declaration, and we'll add our variable name or our identifier, which we'll set as favorite fruits, and then we'll set that to an empty array. And an empty array is signified by an open and close bracket. The values that we want in the array go inside of the open and close bracket, and they're separated by commas. So in here, we're just going to add a few strings of my favorite fruits, and we'll begin with the first one. We'll do mango, comma, we'll do like blueberry, comma, and then raspberry. So this is how you create an array. Once again, open bracket, close bracket, and then within that, you can add whatever data type you'd like, and each value is separated by commas. So how do we access these values? We'll start off by just logging the variable itself. So we'll do favorite fruits, save that, go back here, and see what happens. As you can see, we have the entire array printed out to the screen. So how do we get just one value out of this array? The way we do that is, once again, with these brackets. This is what is referred to as bracket notation. And within this bracket, we add an index. And an indexed is a zero-based identifier that specifies what is known as an element within the array. So, as we said earlier, it starts at 0. It's a zero-based index, and it increments by 1 for each element within the array. So if we start right here, this first one would be index 0. If we go right here, this would be index 1. If we go right here, that would be index 2. So if we go down here, we'll just add the index 0 to this bracket notation, save that, go back, run it, and you'll see that it only logs mango out to the screen. So let's add 2 more console.log statements. And as we said, it increments by 1, so we'll change this to 1 and this to 2. Save that, run it again, and now you'll see that all 3 fruits, mango, blueberry, and raspberry, are logged out to the screen. The reason we say that arrays are ordered is because the order of the strings within the array matters, because these indices refer to the spot within the array. It doesn't actually refer to the value. So if we moved mango from here and added it after blueberry, save this and run our program again, now you'll see that instead of mango, blueberry, raspberry, we get blueberry, mango, raspberry. Finally, we have the powerhouse of JavaScript known as the JavaScript object. Now, objects in JavaScript are pretty similar to an array in that they both store multiple values, but the way we access the values within an object is a bit different than an array. Because if you'll remember, an array is an ordered set of values, and to get each element within the array, we start at 0, and then we increment by 1 until we get to the element we want, and then we just print it out in our case. With objects, there's a little bit more of a user-friendly way to get these values. So let's see what this looks like. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to delete these console.logs, and then I'm actually just going to move this down because we'll use these in a minute. So similar to all of our other variables and data types, we start with the variable declaration. Then we add our identifier. In this case, I'll just use user object. Add our equals assignment operator, and then unlike arrays where we use an open and close brackets, with objects we use an open and close curly brace. And within this is where we add our values. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to move this down a line, and then we're going to add our first value, which will start with just my name. So in an array, we would have just added my name here like this. But with an object, what you do instead is you add a property name. So here we'll just do name, and then you finish this with a colon, and then after that, you add the value that you want in that property. And I accidentally put a semicolon there. You don't put a semicolon. If you want another value, you do a comma. So then below this, we'll do age. We'll add my age, and then we'll do one more. And this is where we'll utilize what we just had. So we'll do favorite fruits, and then we'll add that array as its value. So as you see, since this is the last one, we don't add a trailing comma here. We just leave that off. So this is how you declare an object. And as you can see, it's a mix of data types. We have a number here, we have just a single string here, and then we have an array of strings here, as opposed to an array where you're typically going to have all of the same data type. It would be really weird to have an array like favorite fruits and then just randomly throw a Boolean in there. You kind of want all of these things to be related, whereas something like a user object, you can tell all of this stuff is about me, but they're just different properties about me. We have a property like name, we have a property like age, and then we have a property like favorite fruits, which contains multiple values. So how do we access this stuff? We'll do a console.log, and then we'll do user object, and instead of putting an index within brackets like we did with an array, instead we're just going to use dot notation, and after user object dot, we just put whatever property it is that we want. So in this case, we'll just put name. So we'll save that, go back to our terminal, run this, and you can see, sure enough, Adam's logged to the screen. So let's log the rest of these items. So we'll do console.log, user object.age, and then we'll do console.log. And just to get a little fancy here, we'll do user object.favorite fruits, and then I actually just want to log this one, raspberry. So we go 0, 1, 2. And that. So as you can see, we have user object.name here, which should print out Adam. We have user object.age, which should print out 28. And then we have user object.favorite fruits, which is this entire array. But then we have the second index. So 0, 1, 2, that should print out raspberry. So we'll go back to our terminal. Just hit up if you just want to run the previous command that you ran. So we'll do up, hit enter, and sure enough, Adam, 28, and raspberry are logged out to the screen. It is possible to use bracket notation with JavaScript objects as well. So rather than doing something like user object.name here, you can instead get rid of the .name, add your brackets, and then within that, add the string with the property name you want to access. And then if we go back and run this, you'll see that Adam still works. Dot notation is by far the most common that you see within JavaScript. Most developers I've worked with use dot notation. The only time they really use bracket notation is when they have to. And I say have to because it's actually possible to create properties within objects that aren't valid variable names. So what we're going to do is first we'll go here and we'll just do let hyphenated dash variable. We'll try to declare that, and as you can see, unexpected token. You're not allowed to put a dash within a variable name in JavaScript, but when you're working with objects, it's possible to do that. So we'll do favorite drinks, and in that we'll just add a single drink like this. So if you were to try to access this favorite drinks property using dot notation, favorite drinks, we'll save that, run our program, you'll see that it's not working. It throws a little error on that dash drinks, and that's because that's not a valid variable name. So in order to get this to work, we would actually have to use bracket notation. So the only time you use it is really when you need to. And the reason I say need to is because most developers just avoid writing property names like that. If you wanted a property name like that, just do favorite drinks. Before moving on, I also just want to show you that it is possible to have an object within an object. So here what we're going to do is delete that property, and we're going to add another car property. And rather than setting that value to a string or a number or an array, we're going to set it to another object. And in this, we're going to add a make property. We'll add Honda, and then we'll do model. We'll add Civic, and then we'll add one more property that we'll set to a Boolean, so true. And once again, we leave off our last comma here, leave off our last comma here, and we save this. And now we can see how we access these values. So similar to earlier, we do user object, then we're going to do .car to get to this property, and then we'll log something like make. So user object .car .make should log out Honda. So we'll go back, run that, and sure enough, we see Honda. And just to make sure, we'll update this one to model, run that. Sure enough, we get Honda Civic. Now, earlier I mentioned that arrays were ordered. We access the specific elements within the array by an index, and the order within an array matters. We swapped around two strings, saw that our log statements changed because the ordering changed. With objects in JavaScript, the ordering does not matter. So if we were to take this car object, move it, let's say to our first one, we have to add a comma here because there's another property following it, whereas here we can remove that comma because there's no property following it. We'll save this, go up here, or go back to our terminal, run that program, and you'll see it's still logging out Honda Civic because the ordering of these properties doesn't matter because we're accessing the values by the property name. We're no longer accessing them by an index where, this is 0, this is 1, this is 2. We're just saying user object.car.make, and it goes from user object to car to make to get the value Honda. And as long as that's Honda, it's always going to give us Honda. The last thing we're going to cover isn't a data type, but it is something that allows us to have a bit more fun with everything we've learned so far. And this is what is known as a conditional. And even if you haven't programmed all that much, at some point you've probably heard people throw around if this, else that. Like it seems to have transcended programming to some degree. So let's see what these conditionals look like in our code. So the first thing we're going to do is we're just going to get rid of these two console.log statements, and we'll leave this user object the same. And what we're going to do is we're essentially going to code the bouncer example that we described earlier. So remember, our conditions were if the person whose ID we're checking, if they're 21 or older, they can go in the bar. If they're under that age, then they can't. So the way we do this is we start with the if keyword, and we follow that with an open and close parentheses, and in this is where we stick our condition. So what we're going to do is if user object.age is greater than or equal to 21. So that's our condition. And if this condition is truthy, we'll get to truthy in a minute, we're going to execute some code. And the way we specify this code is with this open and close brace. So if user object.age is greater than or equal to 21, run everything inside this. So what we're going to do is we're just going to write a simple statement, console.log, this user can drink. So that gets our first scenario. We check the ID, they're old enough to drink, we write out this user can drink. But remember, we had the other scenario. What if they're below 21? Well, in that case, we're just going to use this other keyword, else, and because there's no condition for it, we've already established the condition here. There's only one other alternative. Within here, we'll write console.log, this user cannot drink. So remember, this is where we said we kind of had that Boolean logic, right? You check the age. If they meet the condition, if they're over 21, it's essentially true, meaning you run this. Otherwise, if it's false, you run this. So we'll save that, go back to our terminal, run our program, And sure enough, we see this user can drink. And that's because user object.age is 28, and 28 is greater than or equal to 21 is true. And because it's true, it logs out this user can drink. Now, just to show you that this else actually works, we can just go up here, change the age to like 18. So now user object.age, which is 18, is greater than or equal to 21, is no longer true. So now we should see this user cannot drink printed to the screen. So we go back to our terminal, run it, and sure enough, this user cannot drink. Earlier, when we were talking about this if statement and the condition within it, I said that this condition has to evaluate to something that's truthy. And I said we'd get to that in a minute. So let's discuss what it is I mean by truthy and also its counterpart falsy. So what we're going to do is go to the blog post that's associated with this video, copy that code, and then I'm just going to come back here and paste it. So let's take a look at what's happening in this code. So the first thing we do is we declare a variable with the name user, and we assign it to this string with my name. Below that, we have an if-else statement as we saw earlier, but notice the condition here. The condition in our previous example was comparing two numbers. We had an age, and then we had our limit of 21. So the first time we ran the program, we had an age of 28. Is 28 greater than or equal to 21? It was, so it logged the first statement. Then we changed the age to 18, and all of a sudden that statement was no longer true, so it logged what was in the else block. But here we just have a variable. There's no comparison, it's not a number compared to another number, it's literally just a variable name. And then if that is truthy, we do this console.log where we print out this string, and I'll get to all these plus signs in a minute. Otherwise, we log out goodbye. And notice I left a semicolon off there. So let's see what happens if we run this. So we go to our terminal, we run node.datatypes.js, and it prints goodbye Adam. So what is going on here? What's happening is that this value only needs to be truthy. It doesn't necessarily need to be true. So as long as a variable has a value, as far as the if statement's concerned, it's a truthy statement. So let's update this instead, and we'll just declare a variable, but we don't actually assign it a value. So we'll save that, go back to our terminal, run it again, and now we see the else statement has been executed. We now see goodbye rather than goodbye the name of the user. So just removing the value assignment from our variable declaration resulted in user evaluating as falsy, which executed the code within our else block. And the reason for this is because when you declare a variable without assigning it a value, it results in undefined. And in JavaScript, undefined is one of the many falsy values. And in the blog post, I've actually provided a list of what is considered falsy in JavaScript. And as you can see, if undefined is one of those values. The last thing I need to briefly touch on before we wrap up is the code within this if block, this console.log with a couple of plus signs in it. If you remember earlier when we were talking about some of the mathematical operators available to us with numbers, we had plus, we had minus, we had multiplication, we had division. The mathematical operator plus is one of the unique ones in JavaScript because not only will it add two numbers together, but it will also take multiple strings and concatenate them together or join them together as a single string. So here, if we were to change this back to Adam, we see that we have a console.log and there's just one big argument here. So first we have a string goodbye, which contains this trailing space at the end. Then we add our plus sign. Then we add our variable user, which has the value of Adam. And then after that, we do another plus sign with another string that contains an exclamation point. And if we run that just one more time, you'll see that it works perfectly fine. It has goodbye, comma, then there's a space, which we've accounted for here. Then finally, we have the value within user, followed by the exclamation point. Before we wrap up, I'm going to walk you through the exercise that I've added at the bottom of the blog post, and this is what I'm actually going to use to push up to GitHub. So if you're still working on these exercises and you don't want to see the answers just yet, hit pause right now, and then I'm just going to copy and paste this, and this is actually what I'm going to commit to GitHub when I push this up. So here I've copied the exercise. I'm going to reduce the font size just a little bit. And what we have here is just one giant object. And there's a few console.log statements down here. And you're supposed to guess what's going to be printed to the screen. So the first one, it's user object dot favorite fruits, and we're looking at the second index. So we have user object favorite fruits 0, 1, 2. So we know that that one's going to be blueberry. And we'll go down here, user object dot car dot is functional. So here we have my car property is functional is true. So we'll put true there. Now we have user object dot computer, which is an array. It's the 0 index dot manufacturer. This one's a little tricky, and I put it there on purpose because when we were going through the different data types, remember we said we can have an object, but we can also have an object within the object, right? Well, you can also have an array of objects. So here we have an array of strings, right? We have a string, comma, another string, comma, another string. Under computer, once again, we have an array, which we can tell by the brackets, and then each element within this array is actually an object. So here's the first one, manufacturer type, comma, here's the second one, manufacturer type. So if we go back down here, read through this again, user object dot computer, so we know that's this property right here, but then we want the 0th index, or from our point of view, it's the first one, but starting at 0. So that would mean we're looking right here. Dot manufacturer, that should be Apple. And then once again, user object dot computer, this time we're looking at the first index, and once again, the manufacturer property. So we could see that is Dell. So we'll save this, go back to our terminal, I'll clear this, and then run our code. And as you can see, blueberry, true, Apple, Dell, blueberry, true, Apple, Dell. All right, so to finish this, what we're going to do is we're going to go to GitHub. I'm going to create a new repository, and we're going to call this one web dev data types. Create repository. And then we're going to go back to our terminal. We'll do git init, git status to see everything, make sure that our file's there. So what we're going to do is git add period, which means add the entire directory, add every file. We'll do git commit, add a message, which is JavaScript data types. And then we need to add the URL for this repository that we just created. So we'll just copy and paste that command. And then we can do git push origin master. Nothing like a good fat finger for the YouTube video. Add our username and password. Takes a second. Now we can refresh and see our data types file is here, along with the answers for you to double check if you paused a little bit earlier. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to like and subscribe below to stay updated whenever my latest video is released. And also leave a comment below if you have any feedback, if there was anything confusing, let me know and I'll get back to you. In the next video, we're going to be looking at some of the properties available to us on our data types, which might not make too much sense right now, but we're also going to be looking at functions. We've already used a couple so far, console.log, alert from the first video, and we're actually going to be writing some functions of our own. So subscribe, stay up to date, and see you guys next time.